Yeah, so I feel like I should sort of start by apologizing for the slow start that we got off to this morning. As you noticed, we were a little bit puzzled as we started, and I realized that, I think we spent maybe more time the last couple of days preparing the release, and less for the fact that we have to announce the release to you this morning. So my apologies for that. We weren't maybe quite awake yet, but we do have some nice things to talk about. And one of them is this new approach to PDF customization. When I built these slides, I also didn't include one of those introductory slides that tells you about me. Jarno likes to call those vanity slides. I think that's why I left them out. But then I also realized that in some cultures, like in Japan, it's actually kind of rude not to introduce yourself, because that assumes that everyone knows who you are. So I'm sorry about that. My name is Roger Sheen. I've been working as a DITA consultant for many years. And at some point, I realized that I was using this open source project for client work, and I was earning money doing that. And this thing is free. And that didn't feel quite right. So I realized maybe I need to find a way to help. If I'm using this thing that doesn't cost me any money, and it's saving time and solving problems for my clients, how can I give back to this thing? And I realized, well, I was trained as a tech writer. I did a lot of tech writing work. Maybe this project needs some tech writing help. And Jarno nodded. And the rest was kind of history. I ended up working then on the documentation for a long time. But I have evolved a little bit from tech writing to sort of documentation processes and writing processes in general. I help my clients nowadays to optimize their content processes, whether that's technical documentation or UI copies of the text that appears in the user interface. So some people would call all that content operations these days. We'll probably be calling it something else next year. But in that capacity, I use different tools for different jobs. I'm not the kind of person that tries to do everything with DITA because I think DITA is the coolest thing since sliced bread. It's good for many, many things. And this is the heretical moment of this DITA-OT Day conference when I say, there are other tools out there. I have used some of those other tools, and I like some of the approaches that they have. And so sometimes it's refreshing to step outside of the sphere that we work in all the time and think about what other approaches are there to solving these problems. One of the tools that I started using a couple of years ago, 2 years ago maybe, for one of my clients is ASCII-Doc. And I'm just curious, at a DITA-OT Day event, how many of you have used ASCII-Doc? 1, 2, 3 hands, 4 hands maybe. Okay, 5 hands maybe, something like that. So they have a similar problem, right? They come from an XML environment where DocBook existed. It was hard to author DocBook, and someone said, could we find a way to do all of this in plain text? And they found a way to do all of this in plain text. So it kind of mirrors the DITA is too hard, we need Markdown discussion that we've been having. But the ASCII-Doc community has a nice way of producing custom PDF output as well. And so Jarno and I got talking about that and said that's kind of a neat thing that they have that we don't have. What if we could have that? And as is often the case, if you talk to Jarno about an interesting idea, he starts making keyboardy sounds, and then something ships soon. So I think that what we have to introduce today is something that goes to the work that Jarno's been doing on this about finding a simpler way to produce custom PDF output. So many tech writers find it pretty hard to customize the default PDF output from the toolkit, and that even relatively minor adjustments do require some knowledge of XSLT or attribute sets, DITA-OT plugins, maybe some research to figure out where all of that is and what you need to change. So what if there was an easier way to do that? And so that's where we arrive now, is that in DITA-OT 4.0, there is a new plugin that bears Jarno's name because it's his work. And this plugin extends the default PDF plugin with a new theme parameter. It's not an entirely new thing. Jarno will explain to you how it works in a moment. it's still based on the PDF2 plugin, but it provides like a layer above that to make it simpler to tell the PDF2 plugin how to change things. So to build a PDF with this approach, you pass the theme parameter to the DITA command on the command line, and tell it where your theme file lives that contains the information about how you'd like things to be formatted. And those theme files can be written in either JSON or YAML, which are two simplified ways of representing things. If you use the YAML version of the theme file, I believe it's converted to JSON under the hood. So in the background, it's all JSON-y things that get converted to XML-y things. But for us, it makes it just a little bit easier because writing YAML is a little bit easier than writing XML or XSLT attributes and things like that. So there is now, in the 4.0 release of the toolkit, a sample theme for the documentation. And so this is shipped along with the rest of the documentation in the toolkit installation package. There's a themes folder in the samples folder of the toolkit installation directory. And the examples there are all in YAML format just because it's a little bit more compact, a little bit easier to read and to write than the JSON is. But that gives the documentation in the 4.0 release in the PDF format, slightly different look. So everybody remember this? Yeah? Sexy, right? Yep. So, you know, that's where we started. This is what we have now. It looks a little bit different. So the YAML theme file that we used to produce this is shipped in the toolkit so you can see exactly what we did. And I'll just walk through now briefly some of the things that we did there. I'm not going to try to explain exhaustively everything that's possible with this approach, but just to give you a sense of what we did there. And you know, rather than flipping through the PDF the whole time and showing you page by page what happened, I'm just going to walk you through a few of the basic customizations that we did so that you can see how we went about doing that. And I think that you'll see that for many of these things, it's a rather simple way to do this. So what can you actually do here, right? What I'm showing here are excerpts from that theme file that are included in the documentation, and you should be able to adapt these for your own use, right? So first off, one of the first things you need to do when you're setting up some kind of custom output is you probably need to adapt it to your company's brand, right? So basic brand colors and stuff like that, right? So you define some variables. I recommend that you define variables. You don't need to. You could say color of every little thing, but you could say our company really loves purple and our company brand color is purple and the secondary color is red or green or something hideous that your marketing department has come up with. But you know, these are your company colors, so you can kind of define a color palette and say these are the colors we want to use. And if you give them some sort of, you know, slightly semantic names, then you can just do nice things later on, like you could maybe in CSS or SAS or other styling languages, that you can use a variable to define the brand color, and then you can use those shared values elsewhere in your styles and say, you know, semantic reference such as headings are brand color primary or something like that, right? So that's one way to start off, is to just say what color palette do you want to use. Something similar for fonts. You may have corporate fonts that you use for all of your publications. So if you define those fonts once and say, you know, we have maybe a sans serif font that we use for headings, maybe there's a serif font for body text, maybe there's a particular monospace font that we want to use for code examples and things like that. So you just define those font stacks once, much like you would in CSS or elsewhere. It's not a really different approach here. And just for the sake of simplicity, this example just replicates the same font stacks that were used in the original PDF2 output. I don't even have anything special here. But this is just one way of saying there are basically three different font setups that we have: the sans serif, the serif, and the monospace stuff. And we'll reference those then elsewhere to style individual elements and things. So that makes it quite easy to do that, because then you don't have to repeat the font on every little thing that you want to assign. You just say, use corp font here, and you can place that in 10 different places. And then if your marketing department next week decides after the merger with big company that your corporate font is now something else, you change your corporate font in one place and it percolates everywhere that you've set it. So that's a pretty easy way to do that. In these theme files, you can do basic page setup, right? So you can just give it a standard page size. You can do things like orientation, portrait, landscape, that kind of stuff. You can set your margins, decide whether you want those margins to be different on left and right pages, or to use the same margins. So the same kinds of things you've been doing all along, just a little easier way to do that. If you compare that little bit of code with the code that you would have had to write to do that in XSLT attribute sets, this is a little easier. And another nice thing about this is that if you have one theme that defines sort of the base styling for your organization, these are what our company PDFs look like. But you have some extra use case where you realize, okay, for these particular ones, we need something different. We need a different page size or something like that. Maybe you have one theme that defines your whole corporate style, and have something else that defines, let's say, overrides for page sizes or something like that. So we've got an example there in the documentation that allows you to basically extend one theme with another, where you have the one theme that defines everything, and there's another one that says, take all of that stuff from that other one, but change this one thing. So we have two examples there that say the page size in the documentation PDF for the toolkit is currently a transitional page format called PA4. Some people may be familiar with that. It's kind of the least common denominator of both A4 and letter. So you can take that PDF and you can print it on US letter or A4 and it just works. But if for some reason you really want a US letter, well, guess what? You have a US letter theme and you say, boom, give our PDF that theme file instead, and out comes the same thing, but on letter or A4. So really simple way to change these things. And you basically just pass a different theme file name to the DITA command, and it will then take the settings in there plus the settings in whatever thing it extends, right? So that's a nice way to make a little hierarchic set of themes that depend on one another. So you don't have to repeat things, and you don't have to do all of those settings in two different themes. And if you add any new keys to this particular theme, they'll just be overlaid onto the settings in the other one. So it's basically a superset of like anything here plus anything there. And anything here wins over anything there. Another thing that people need to do now and then is add an image to the cover page, right? So there's basic cover and cover title styles that can be used to add a background image and place it on the page. So that cover page that you saw there, that logo that you saw there, thank you in public once again to Sasha for creating our wonderful logo. Here he is, yay! Round of applause for Sasha. We didn't have a logo for years, now we have one, yay. So there's that. So that that's a pretty simple bit of YAML there as well that says, hey, on the cover, we want a background image with this file name. We don't want it to repeat, just put it there once. We want it to stretch to a height of 25 centimeters. And then the title, we want to use our brand color primary for that. We want it to be in 36 point, and we use some space before setting to bump it down so that it appears below the logo. And you just fumble around with those until you get the title and the image in the right relationship to one another, and you're done. So there's lots more that you can do with these themes. I didn't want to walk through every single thing that's possible, because essentially the way it's set up, everything that's possible is everything that's possible in all of these XSLT attributes that you've known for a while. So you can use basically almost any XSLT properties for the supported elements, but you can't do everything. So I really like John's little image before from music and the sort of sample rate and that kind of stuff, right? I think that's a really, really good analogy here. Like the Markdown and lightweight DITA stuff, this was created to be something simpler. And remember that. It's supposed to be simple. It can't do everything. But if all you need to do to have a custom PDF is to change some colors and change some fonts and put an image on the cover and simple stuff like that, this is super easy to do. If you need something else, well, you might need to build a plugin, right? But you know how to do that now, because you've been doing that for years. So this is the easy way. And the hard stuff, how to make all of this work, that's his job. He'll explain that now. So that's it for me.